rail lines. They're physically separated by 5.9 million square kilometers of ocean.
Right. It's just massive.
Yeah, you don't have this solid, continuous block of land to draw a border around.
Yeah.
You just have thousands of scattered fragments.
Which completely breaks the traditional geopolitical mold. I mean, we usually associate national identity with continuous soil. When you don't have that, the entire playbook for how a nation survives has to be, rewritten from scratch.
Totally. And welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is exploring exactly that, how a country's physical geography doesn't just shape its map, but literally dictates its political philosophy, its survival strategy, and its whole national identity.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We are pulling from an academic text today on a concept called Wawasan Nusantara, and that translates the Indonesian archipelagic vision. We're going to look at how global powers traditionally played the geopolitical game, and then see how Indonesia, which is a nation composed entirely of over 17,000 islands, had to basically invent a completely new reality just to keep itself from splintering into firewood.
And, for you listening, understanding geopolitics is just so vital right now. It's essentially the study of how the physical Earth impacts political power. We see nations making headlines for border disputes or trade wars, and it often feels purely ideological.
Oh yeah, like it's just politicians arguing.
Exactly. But looking at the geopolitical foundations, it strips away all that political rhetoric. It forces us to look at the physical, geographic hand a country was actually dealt and how they play those cards to survive.
Makes sense. And to really appreciate how wildly different Indonesia's vision is, we have to look at this historical baseline, right? The source text dives into how Western thinkers historically viewed state power. And reading through it, the overarching theme just seems to be, well, aggressive expansion.
Oh, absolutely. Dominance was the core operating system of traditional geopolitics. If we look at the evolution of state power, the text points to thinkers like Friedrich Ratzel in the late 19th century.
Okay.
Ratzel introduced what he called the biological theory of the state. He looked at a country and didn't see a government or a collection of laws. He saw a living, breathing organism.
Wait, like he literally thought a country was a biological creature. That sounds kind of absurd on its face. How did international leaders take that seriously as a political doctrine?
Well, you have to view it through the lens of the Industrial Revolution, right?
Oh, okay.
As nations industrialized, their quote-unquote metabolism increased. They needed more coal, more iron, more raw materials just to feed their factories. So Ratzel argued that just like an organism needs food to grow, a state requires living space.
I see. So as it gets more advanced, it needs a bigger footprint.
Exactly. As its population and cultural sophistication grow, it naturally needs more resources. The mechanism there is simple. If a state cannot sustain its growth within its current borders, natural law dictates it must expand outward to absorb its neighbor's space.
Wow.
Yeah, survival literally meant consuming the territory around you. And this concept was later adapted by thinkers like Karl Haushofer, and, well, we saw how devastatingly it was applied by empires in the 20th century.
So I'm understanding this, and tell me if this analogy works. Traditional geopolitics basically treats countries like goldfish in a tank.
Okay, I like that.
Right. If a goldfish gets bigger, it naturally needs a bigger tank. But because there's only one global tank, getting a bigger space means you literally have to eat the other fish's territory.
That is the fundamental mechanic, yes. And global superpowers spent centuries strategizing on exactly which part of the tank was most important to control. The text outlines two major contrasting theories that drove global strategy: land power versus sea power. So Sir Halford Mackinder championed the continental vision. He coined the idea of the heartland, which he defined as the massive interconnected landmass of Europe and Asia.
The biggest piece of land.
Exactly. His doctrine was entirely about compact, impenetrable land power. He argued that whoever rules the heartland commands the resources and manpower of the entire world.
Because if you control the largest unbroken piece of land, you can just move troops and resources around internally, like via rail, and no navy in the world can penetrate deep enough to stop you.
Precisely. But then, and here's the flip side, you have the opposing view from strategists like Alfred Thayer Mahan. He looked at the globe and realized that oceans aren't barriers, they're the world's highways.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right. His maritime theory argued that land power is static, but sea power is dynamic. The logic here is all about economic chokeholds. If you have a dominant navy, you control the critical choke points of global trade.
So you control the supply of goods, the movement of wealth.
Yeah, you can starve an enemy's economy without ever firing a single shot on their actual soil. Therefore, ruling the seas meant dominating the globe.
Okay, so whether we were talking about Mackinder's land dominance or Mahan's sea dominance, the entire philosophy is outward-facing. The goal is always to project your power outward to secure your survival.
Right.
But this leads to the massive contradiction at the center of our source text. What happens if your goldfish tank is already shattered into like 17,508 tiny pieces?
Yeah, you can't exactly project power outward when you barely have a cohesive inside.
Exactly. The Western theorists were trying to figure out how to conquer the global chessboard, but Indonesia was facing the reality that their chessboard was mostly water, and the land pieces were scattered across a distance wider than the United States.
The numbers in the text are just staggering. 17,508 islands. It sits squarely at the crossroads of two continents, Asia and Australia, and two oceans, the Pacific and the Indian.
And it's draped directly across the equator.
Right. The land-to-water ratio dictates everything about their existence. They have roughly 2 million square kilometers of land, but that land is interspersed within 5.9 million square kilometers of sea. They are fundamentally a water-based nation.
Which is wild. The physical fragmentation is wild, but the demographic fragmentation is what really blew my mind. We are looking at a population of roughly 242 million people in this text, completely divided across these islands.
Yeah.
And it's not some homogenous group. The population is made up of 1,128 distinct ethnic groups. There's this vast diversity in race, culture, language, religion.
And that demographic reality fundamentally shifts the definition of national security. For a follower of Raxel or Mahan, the existential threat comes from outside, right? Another empire trying to take your resources or block your trade routes.
Sure.
But for Indonesia, the primary existential threat is internal division. When you have hundreds of distinct cultures, each with their own language and local customs, and they are physically isolated from one another by deep ocean trenches.
The natural gravity just pulls toward fracturing.
Exactly. Without an incredibly strong unifying mechanism, a nation like that simply breaks apart into hundreds of vulnerable microstates.
Okay, so knowing that this geography is highly fragmented, how do they legally tie 17,508 islands together? Because you obviously can't build a bridge between all of them.
No, definitely not.
The source material details this brilliant legal maneuver regarding the water itself. But to understand the solution, we kind of have to look at the massive legal problem they inherited, right? This Dutch colonial regulation from 1939 called the TZMKO.
Right, the 1939 law. Under this colonial law, the definition of territorial sovereignty was based strictly on individual landmasses. The law stated that each individual island only possessed a 3-mile ring of sea around its coastline, measured from the low tide mark.
Okay, wait, so anything beyond that 3-mile ring was considered the high seas?
Yes.
Which means international waters.
Right.
So if we have two Indonesian islands that are, say, 15 miles apart, each island gets 3 miles of territorial water. That leaves a 9-mile gap of pure international water right down the middle.
Legally, that gap belonged to the world. Foreign warships, international commercial vessels, or, foreign fishing fleets could legally sail right between Indonesian islands without needing any permission from the Indonesian government.
The implication of that is just terrifying for a newly independent nation. The sea wasn't part of the country. The sea was acting as a wall.
Yes.
It was a divider separating the nation from itself. A foreign submarine could legally park in the water between two of your major cities.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot build a cohesive national identity or a secure state when the physical space connecting your people belongs to whoever has the biggest navy.
It's impossible. The geography, compounded by this colonial law, was actively dismantling the Indonesian state. And this brings us to December 13th, 1957, and the Juanda Declaration.
Okay.
Prime Minister Juanda Kartuadja realized that playing by the traditional European rules of maritime law was basically a death sentence for Indonesian unity. So he decided to completely rewrite the legal definition of an archipelago.
So instead of drawing 17,508 individual 3-mile circles around every single island, the Juanda Declaration stated that all the waters around, between and connecting the islands regardless of their width, were natural parts of Indonesia's inland territory.
Right. They basically drew straight lines connecting the absolute outermost points of their outermost islands, creating this massive polygon. Everything inside that shape was suddenly claimed as absolute sovereign territory.
Which is such a profound paradigm shift. With a single diplomatic declaration, the sea was instantly transformed from a divider of islands into a connector of islands.
The water became the national glue, and they also expanded the outer territorial limit from 3 miles to 12 miles.
But wait, you can't just draw a giant box on a map and tell the international community, hey, millions of square kilometers of ocean are ours now.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Right. This water used to be free real estate for global shipping. I have to imagine global superpowers, the ones who rely on those Mahanian theories of open sea dominance, did not just smile and nod.
Oh, they absolutely did not. The declaration was highly controversial, and it triggered a 25-year diplomatic struggle. You have to view this through the lens of the Cold War.
Oh, right.
Superpowers like the United States and the Soviet Union relied heavily on global naval mobility, particularly for their nuclear submarine fleets. Straits passing through Indonesia, like the Sunda Strait or the Lombok Strait, are critical global choke points.
So if Indonesia suddenly claims those waters as internal territory, foreign militaries lose the right of free, unannounced passage.
Exactly. Superpowers fiercely resisted any legal framework that would restrict their naval movement.
So how did Indonesia eventually win this argument? Because they did win it.
Through relentless, decades-long diplomacy at the United Nations, they had to convince a world built on traditional power dynamics to accept a completely novel concept in international law. And the breakthrough didn't come until 1982.
With the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Commonly known as UNCLS, yes.
Right. And the text highlights UNCLS as this massive international victory for Indonesia.
It formally codified the archipelago state principle. The international community finally conceded that for a nation comprised entirely of islands, the water between them is a vital internal artery, not an international thoroughfare.
That's incredible.
It is. It ratified Indonesia's claim to that 5.9 million square kilometers of sea area, solidifying their territorial waters and establishing their exclusive economic zone. Foreign ships were granted innocent passage through specific sea lanes, but the sovereignty of the water belonged definitively to Indonesia.
Okay, so the physical map is finally united. The geographical puzzle is legally solved. The dividing oceans are now unifying national territory.
Right.
But having the land and the water legally bound together doesn't automatically mean the minds of the people are bound together. We are still talking about 242 million people across 1,128 distinct ethnic groups. How do you prevent those groups from just turning on each other inside those new maritime borders?
Well, the physical unification through the Juanda Declaration was merely the prerequisite. The true survival of the state relies on the concept we introduced at the very beginning, Wawasan Nusantara.
Ah, okay.
If the legal borders secure the geography, Wawasan Nusantara secures the psychology.
And the etymology of the term is really revealing here. The text notes that Wawasan comes from the Javanese root word wawas, which means to look, to gaze, or to see. So Wawasan Nusantara essentially translates to the archipelagic way of seeing.
Yeah, several scholars and institutions in the source material, like Professor Juan Usman and the National Resilience Institute, offer varying technical definitions, but synthesizing their points reveals a very clear core mechanism.
Which is?
Wawasan Nusantara is a collective mental framework. It is the conscious, engineered choice to view Indonesia as one single, unbroken political, economic, social, and cultural entity, despite the overwhelming physical reality that it is fragmented into thousands of pieces.
But, a mental framework has to be based on something tangible. You can't just tell 1,000 different ethnic groups to think as one without a